This might be a unique perspective because I watched Gladiator all of 3 weeks ago and I loved it. In that time, I've probably watched it, honestly, probably about 6 total times. Twice I've actually watched it, 3 to 4 times I've had to edit it and try and pass it through YouTube's content ID algorithm. So I had to edit and re-edit that reaction, which you can find somewhere on this channel. But honestly, that film moved into one of my favorite films of all time, full stop. So what does a 3-week-old Gladiator fan think of Gladiator 2? He enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. Honestly, I wasn't sure that I would. I don't know what my expectations. You know what? My expectations were low. Like I mentioned in my Gladiator review, my last Ridley Scott outing was for Napoleon. I attended the premiere, and I was, I was gonna say I was whelmed. I wasn't whelmed. I thought that film was pretty stale. And so, regardless of knowing the genius of Ridley Scott can create something like Gladiator, I was thinking not at the peak of his powers. It's a sequel. However many years later, it could be a car crash. It could also just be fine, but I don't think I was expecting to enjoy it as much as I did, honestly. So this movie takes place about 2 years after, a couple of decades after the original. And Lucius, played by Paul Mescal, the son of Lucilla, played by Connie Nielsen in the original movie, is now living in Numidia. I also actually say, this is gonna be a spoiler review before I get into the spoilers. This is gonna be a spoiler review. So either you've watched it, or I know there's people out there who enjoy watching spoiler reviews before they actually go and watch a movie. I don't get it, but do as you please. Just letting everyone know. But yeah, Lucius is living in Numidia now. He has a wife. Rome does as Rome does, and the Roman army, led by General Acacius, played by Pedro Pascal, is on their way to Numidia to conquer, just for the banter. Rome does as Rome does. Rome wins. Lucius loses his wife in the battle that takes place. Lucius becomes a slave that's bought by Macrinus to become a gladiator. Gladiator 2. I mean, just from that summary alone, I didn't read the summary, by the way, and I only half watched one trailer before going into this film, so I didn't really know what to expect from the plot. But as I'm doing that description, you can probably hear, pretty much sounds like Gladiator, which is true. The film follows, mimics, whatever word you want to use, a lot of the beats from the original movie. It borrows in general a lot from the original movie, especially within the first act, which is probably when I was at my most. I felt myself in the first act of this movie being like I was so skeptical that I was literally just looking at the screen like just trying to figure out what we doing here, where we go, like what's the move. And in that first act, maybe somewhat in between the first act and leading to halfway through the movie, it was almost going exactly beat for beat with the original. And I was starting to get a bit worried that we were getting The Force Awakens to A New Hope, if you get my comparison. My feeling in that first act was a lot of the things that were happening felt familiar, which somewhat was good, but they were having less of an impact, which wasn't as good. So for instance, the death of Lucius's wife is his big motivator for vengeance. And from then on, he sets his sights on Acacius, wrongly, but that's his motivation. He's dead focused, dead set on getting revenge. But it just doesn't work as well. It happens so soon, it happens so quick into the movie that it just doesn't work as well. And we don't have these same... So in this film, they do a version, they recreate the afterlife, purgatory type scenes that we got with Maximus kind of in the wheat fields, and with that house that he was constantly looking towards. They recreate that, but obviously now Lucius's upbringing has influenced the way he sees the afterlife, etc. And so they have those scenes where he's looking at his wife, and so they have those scenes where his wife is crossing the river, and they cut to it a few times. It just doesn't work. It just doesn't work as well. For me, it wasn't as visually interesting, and it just wasn't as compelling in general. I wish his vengeance, I wish his motivation was there. His need to go back to Rome and do something was there, rather than needing his wife to die to set things in motion. Maybe something else could have set it in motion. I wasn't a fan of the wife beat for beat because it wasn't done as well as in Gladiator. And it, naturally, because this movie leans so much into the things that happen in Gladiator, you can't help but compare when they're making things beat for beat. If they changed it up, it wouldn't necessarily be such a comparison, but they make it so easy for you to look back and look at, we did this, especially in that first act. The action in this film, oh my goodness. I remember saying in my first review that as much as Gladiator is positioned as Gladiator, you're expecting war, you're expecting fights, you're expecting battles. There was less in that film than I was expecting when I knew the film was called Gladiator. Gladiator 2, my goodness. I don't think it's wild to say that there is more action The opening battle when Rome is conquering Numidia is fantastic. There are more battles in the Colosseum, probably about one or two more than you get in the original movie. And they are much wilder than the first movie. It's like Ridley Scott just turned the dial up on the craziness. I must say though, those monkeys, they're not monkeys. I don't know what they were, but why couldn't they just be monkeys? Are monkeys not wild enough? Monkeys are scary, you know. Those joints were demonic. I don't know what they were, and I don't know why we had to. We kind of stepped into the unrealistic, and I don't think it was necessary, but I still enjoyed it. It's kind of the same with the Colosseum naval battle. The mock naval fights in the water was a real thing. I think we could have kept it there. But the choice to add sharks into the water, like, I think the turning point where I really started to enjoy this movie was when Pedro Pascal died in the arena after being forced into a battle with Lucius. And that's no discredit to Pedro Pascal, by the way. I think he was great in this movie. But for me, this movie really got going with his death. It was like a sacrifice for the greater good. Honestly, I would even say just slightly before. From when Denzel starts to do the heavy manipulation and uses the information and his knowledge of what Lucilla and Acacius are up to and brings them into the hall in front of the Cramp twins. It's like it ramps up from there. And then when Acacius dies, it's like, yeah, I'm adding this on after the fact with a charging microphone, which has now become my staple, and no windshield so you can hear all the But I forgot to mention I was going to call them the Tramp twins. I forgot to mention the Cramp twins, the fraternal twin emperors, played by Joseph Quinn, who I'm familiar with. A Quiet Place 2. I know he had a scene in Game of Thrones, and I also know him from Small Axe. Most people probably know him from Stranger Things. Controversially, I've only watched the first season of Stranger Things, and then I tapped out. It wasn't really for me. It's not my favorite show. And then Fred Heschinger, who I do not know, but I'm now seeing he's going to be in Craven the Hunter as Chameleon. I mean, I'm not necessarily looking forward to that show. Oh, he was in The White Lotus. I don't remember him. Anyway, I'm getting distracted. I'll look at all of that afterwards. I really like that duo. They're awkward, they're weird, they're slimy, they're a bit sick, a bit twisted. They're not the same. Quinn's getter is, I wouldn't say slightly, he's more mature. He's still sick. He's still sick and twisted. But you feel there's a bit more structure to his sick and twistedness. Fred Heschinger's Caracalla he feels more like a younger brother that is just enjoying the freedom of being an emperor and doing as he pleases and getting what he wants when he wants, as he wants, and not caring for the consequences because he's childlike. He's just a very odd and twisted child. I mean, you see that in the relationship he has with that pet monkey that he keeps around, and the fact that he's so easily manipulated by Macronus. I appreciate that even though they both feel like descendants of Commodus, they don't feel like Commodus replicas. It would have been very easy for one of them to feel like a Commodus replica. But no, they're both bringing something very different to those characters that make them very distinct from Commodus. Now, they're not as complex as Commodus. Their complexity is probably more so in their relationship between each other rather than as fully fleshed out characters. Like, we get quite a bit of Commodus and why he's the way he is through the conversation he has with his father before he kills him. We don't get that here, but I feel like part of the reason for that is because honestly, they are just puppets in this story. Macronus truly is the antagonist, and so Ridley Scott didn't feel the need to go as deep into why they are the way they are. I mean, I think there's a line in the film about how they've been like that from birth. I really enjoyed those twisted Cramp twins, and I weirdly really enjoyed the way they went out as well. I cringed in the cinema, especially at the ear, but I like them. Good performances. Listen, yeah, Denzel. We are gonna do a Denzel run on this channel in terms of movie reactions because there's so many Denzel films I haven't seen. But Denzel Washington, that this man is one of the GOATs. But my goodness, nobody comes close to him when he's on the screen. Like, he's just in a league of his own. It's scary how clear he is compared to the rest of the cast. And it's so funny going into this movie. There was a big fuss about his accent. Nobody cares. When you see this film and you see the performance, his accent is the last thing you're talking. And frankly, it doesn't really, there's so many variations of this. There's a wide range of accents in this movie. And are we forgetting that this is Rome who conquered so much of the world? Like, there was no one exclusive accent or even language that you would hear under the Roman Empire because it was an empire. So back to Denzel anyway. Oh my goodness me. He will be getting nominated for an Oscar. I don't know whether he's gonna win. I don't think I've seen enough movies this year to say so. But he will be nominated. I'm sure of that. I would put £1 down. The other big performance in this movie, of course, is Paul Mescal. Now, Paul Mescal, honestly, I never put Paul Mescal. I've seen him in a couple of things, All of Us Strangers and something else. I never expected him to have the physicality to do a role like this. Nor would I have even considered it a desire of his. His film catalogue so far is very much in a specific lane, in a specific genre. I was not unsure. I never considered him for films, roles like this. Physically, he was incredible. I would not be surprised to see a long and fruitful career in action movies from here on out. However, and this makes me sad to say, because I do rate Paul Mescal as an actor, there were certain scenes that were almost layups for Lucius as a character to have moments. I would say there was maybe like a couple. There's one at the end of the movie with the two armies on either side of Lucius, and there's one slightly earlier in the film. And they're almost like rallying cries. I know at this point they're not actually going to battle, but that's what the scene that's the kind of persona, character, voice that the scene requires. I don't feel like I truly got that from Paul. Like I wanted to be G'd up, and I wanted to be G'd up myself, and it just never got there. It was like, yeah, it didn't quite get me. It's like in the first movie, that scene where Maximus eventually says his real name, his full name. That moment is basically the birth of Russell Crowe. And I so badly wanted Paul Mescal to have one of those moments, and I don't feel like he ever got there. And Denzel does not help, because every time Denzel's on screen, he obliterates everything in his path, and it's just not fair. It's honestly not fair. Just a couple of other things. Visually, this film is beautiful. The costume and set design and the way it's shot, I love it. I love the details in the costumes. I love the details of Rome. And as we go around Rome and we see these various different locations, be it these kind of court Roman gardens or within like the palace or all of that, and the way Ridley Scott chooses to shoot that. The music is solid. If you love the first, you're gonna hear certain themes and it's gonna feel familiar. Even at the end, you know the scene where Juba is kind of burying the little mini sculptures of Maximus's family. We even have that moment, and I can't remember if it was exactly the same song, but I remember feeling like, oh, this is that. It didn't hit as hard, but I was like, okay, that's what you're doing. But the music was good. I enjoyed it. I don't know how much watching Gladiator and loving Gladiator so recently affects my feelings on the movie. I don't know if people with 24 years of hardcore support waiting for this movie will be as satisfied. But personally, I would recommend people to see this movie, especially in the cinema. If not for the visuals and the scale, at least just see Denzel on the big screen. He's not in the peak of his powers, but I mean, I struggle to say he's not, because what on earth was that? I had a time. I hope you guys do too. Peace.